Welcome to Pep Talk, when Pep talks and your heart is encouraged. Have you ever asked God for comfort and wondered if He really heard you? A few years ago, I lost my little lovebird Chuey through an accident in the home. 3 days later, after having asked God for encouragement, I had a dream that completely changed the way I grieved. And it also changed the way I create art. Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I love to share my Pep Talk episodes. Each is a lesson that God has been teaching me through everyday life, art, and birds. Chuey was what bird people would call a Velcro bird. If I stood up to leave the room, I would eventually hear little wings behind me until he landed on my shoulder. I taught him to wave with one foot and to shake my finger with the other. And he could even say his own name, Chew. He had such a joyful personality that every day with him was like an adventure. Loop-de-loop. Good boy. Good boy.
Wave.
Losing him hurt far more than I ever expected. It reopened grief I'd already experienced through losing my sister only 2 years prior. So all I could do was pray a very simple prayer. Lord, please encourage me. Speak to me. Say something. I'll take anything as long as it comes from you. That very night, God answered my prayer in a way I never could have imagined. I had a vivid dream. Chuey was alive and flying freely again, just like he was before the accident in the home. He was completely healthy, but he was in a completely different world. There wasn't even a hint of the injuries that he had incurred prior to his passing. He was simply full of life the way he had always been before. In the dream, I found myself in what seemed to be a huge mansion. As I walked along a curved wall, I heard the sound of bubbling water, and it drew me forward as I wondered where it was coming from. When I reached the end of the wall, a whole scene opened up to me like a vista. There was this beautiful room full of lush vegetation and tiered, tall water fountains and birds everywhere. The birds were flying and singing and playing in the water, enjoying complete freedom. It was a place that was full of peace and joy and life. Then, for reasons I can't explain, I looked to my left, and there was Chuey. I could see him from behind. He was perched among a whole group of little birds. It was as if he was acquainting himself with all his new friends before joining the rest of the birds in the fun of what I now call the water fountain spray and playroom. In that moment, something deep settled inside of me. He was alive. He was so happy. He was safe. And I knew that I would see him again. So that dream turned my night into bright day. It completely changed the way I see God's love. Not only for us humans, but also for all creation that He has made. He saw my grief, and He didn't dismiss it because it was just a little bird. Instead, He met me right in the middle of it with a gift that brought lasting peace. I remember thinking that the comfort that I felt at that moment was far more real even than the dream itself. It reminded me that God cares about all the details of our lives because He cares deeply for all that He has created. In fact, He loves the birds more than I ever could. For nearly a year, I couldn't bring myself to draw what I had seen in that dream. But the comfort that the dream brought was so real that I found myself returning to it again and again. Even as some of the details seemed to have faded from my memory, the comfort and peace never have. If anything, the comfort and peace have grown deeper. Eventually, I realized that if this dream had brought me so much comfort and peace, maybe a drawing depicting it would bring that comfort and peace to someone else too. So I finally picked up my colored pencils. What emerged could never fully capture what I actually saw in the dream, but it became the first piece of art I created after a long time away from creating art. As I continued reading scripture in the months that followed, I kept finding passages that reminded me that God's redemption reaches farther than I'd ever realized. Jesus said that not one sparrow falls to the ground outside the Father's care. He knows all of His creation ever since the beginning of the world. And in Revelation, He promises, "Behold, I make all things new." And that was exactly what my dream showed me. Chuey was completely made new. God can do that. The dream also changed the way I understood the love that God has given me for birds. I began to see that it's one of the ways that He teaches me about His own heart, His care for every detail of creation, and His compassion for even the smallest creatures. Before that, I might have been embarrassed by how deeply I grieved over such a little bird. But after that dream, I realized something that has stayed with me ever since. God cares for Chuey more than I ever could. If not even a sparrow is forgotten by Him, then we can trust His promise that one day He will make all things new. When I finally finished this piece, I realized that I hadn't just created a drawing. I'd created a reminder of hope, not wishful thinking, but an eternal hope that's like an anchor for the soul. And every time I see it, I'm reminded of God's immense love that I experienced in a very difficult season of my life. The dream, and now the artwork as well, reminds me that nothing is forgotten by God. Not a sparrow, not a little lovebird called Chuey, and certainly not you and me. Whether you've been walking with God for years or you're wondering if he even sees you in your grief. I hope this story reminds you that his heart is far kinder, far more attentive, and far more personal than we often imagine. And that's why this drawing still hangs in my studio today. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded that hope is not wishful thinking. It's rooted in someone who keeps his promises.